Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've pulled together a stack of material that is, well, it's truly panoramic. We're going from post-war British politics all the way to ancient Japanese culture and then into the really unsettling history of scientific ethics.
It's a huge range.
It is. The sources jump across centuries, continents, but there's this thread connecting them, this strange human impulse to measure, to control, and to engineer society.
And that's really our mission today. We want to take these disparate threads and kind of weave them together for you. We're pulling out the most surprising nuggets we could find.
Bizarre political advice, terrifying science.
Exactly. And we'll give you the context to see how these attempts to control human nature, whether it's through honor or policy or even genetics, how they're still defining our world.
Okay, so let's start with a bit of historical perspective. I think it's necessary because before we get into all the chaos and control, we need a baseline, and our sources all seem to agree on one thing. Just looking backward can be a powerful antidote to modern anxiety.
Right. And what's so compelling is the sheer speed of human improvement.
Mm-hmm.
When you zoom out far enough, it becomes really clear that life has been just brutally worse for most of history.
So the main takeaway is?
The takeaway is that you, listening right now, are more likely to die naturally than ever before. Death used to be violent, agonizing, and from things we barely even think about now.
This is a huge point. It's not just if you die, but how? We just assume we'll have anesthesia sanitation, that a small cut won't kill us. People who romanticize the past, they forget the sheer terror and filth of daily life.
Exactly. And that perspective helps us understand this modern feeling that we're somehow in decline. The sources talk about the late 80s and 90s as this perceived little golden era.
The end of history moment.
Yeah, that feeling that everything was solved. But if you compare that tiny sweet spot to the broad sweep of human existence, which has been a steady, if bumpy climate, shows that our current anxiety is more about a skewed perspective than a real collapse.
That idea of a narrow sweet spot is so important. It shows how fast things are really moving. I mean, never mind coffee. Think about modern logistics. You can order something from Asia, and it's on your doorstep in, 48 hours?
Or vaccine development in the last few years. It's not just comfort. It's a level of global connection and scientific power that would have seemed like pure magic even 30 years ago.
Okay, so let's use that theme of societal control to bridge to our next topic. Because if Western progress has been mostly about expanding individual freedom, what happens when a society does the exact opposite? When it chooses extreme internal control?
But now we're talking about Japan.
Right. The sources use this incredible metaphor. After shutting its doors for 300 years, Japan's culture was like it had been homeschooled.
It's a great metaphor. It created this very unique, internally focused society. So when they finally did open up, they could be incredibly selective. They only took what they wanted from the West and just adapted it.
And this self-contained development led to some pretty remarkable cultural traditions. The sources get really deep into the role of seppuku.
Ritual suicide, yeah. Especially in 16th century Japan. And the fundamental idea was that suicide wasn't a tragedy at all. It was the highest act of honor. It was how you redeemed yourself for any perceived failure.
And the bar for failure was? It was incredibly low. We're talking about committing seppuku for the tiniest mistake, a minor faux pas. I mean, how does a society even function day to day with that kind of pressure? What was the benefit of that?
It created an absolutely rigid social order, complete conformity. The sources point out that everyone was sort of expected to die by seppuku eventually. A natural death was actually seen as suspicious.
Suspicious?
Yeah, it's if you hadn't lived a life honorable enough to need to sacrifice yourself. It prioritized the collective, this abstract idea of honor, over any single individual's life.
And this is where that ancient idea connects directly to the 20th century. That cultural detachment from the individual, from Shinto, Confucianism, Buddhism, that's the engine that made the kamikaze missions in World War II possible.
Precisely. If your own life is always second to honor and the state, then sacrificing it for a cause isn't just acceptable, it's desirable. It's desirable. When the military needed volunteers for suicide missions, the sources say the Japanese soldiers were the easiest to find. The cultural script was already written.
And you see that intensity in that Japanese soldier they found in the Pacific in the mid-70s, still fighting the war.
Still fighting the war decades later, yeah.
So that kind of extreme internal control is, well, it's a stark contrast to where we're going next. Post-war Britain. from 1945 to 79, a period that wasn't about rigid control, but about chaotic political engineering followed by a total breakdown.
And the initial engineering part was incredibly fast. It starts with Clement Atlee, who, surprisingly replaces the wartime hero Churchill in 1945.
Right.
And Attlee's Labour government was just brutally productive. In about 18 months, he builds the entire British welfare state, he nationalizes industries, creates the National Health Service, the whole thing.
The socialist Atlee consensus. But it wasn't sustainable, was it, as the global economy changed?
No. The pressure builds through the 60s, and then it all just collapses in the crisis year of 1974. Britain was in a complete tailspin. You had the OPEC energy crisis hitting at the exact same time as massive miners' strikes.
The unions versus the government.
A total standoff. And this forces the Prime Minister, Ted Heath, to bring in the infamous 3-day week, a kind of extreme national rationing.
It's hard to even imagine that level of paralysis. Electricity was rationed for everyone. People were working by candlelight. And the sources point out that television, all TV broadcasting, had to stop at 10 p.m. every night.
They couldn't afford the electricity for the floodlights. And this national downtime led to one of the most bizarre bits of government advice ever recorded.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
To keep people occupied, the official advice during the 3-day week was for people to experiment with their sex lives.
Which, as the sources joke, might just be the official start of kinky stuff in Britain. And the politicians managing this crisis were just as wild as the situation.
Oh yeah. Take Harold Wilson. His second term was basically defined by this toxic, dominating relationship he had with his private secretary, Marcia Williams.
She was ruthless.
Utterly. The sources describe it as a kind of sexual domination. There are stories of her calling him a little socked right in front of his aides, and he would just take it. She even told Wilson's wife that her affair with the Prime Minister was less than satisfactory. It's pure melodrama.
And then you have Ted Heath on the other side, who the sources say had transcended misogyny because he just disliked everyone equally.
Right. And the great irony is that this man, so famous for dismissing women, was ultimately kicked out by Margaret Thatcher, which sent him into what everyone called the longest sulk in history.
The whole story of the chaos ends with this one detail that just perfectly captures how the world saw Britain at the time.
It's incredible. Things were so bad in the 70s that Idi Amin, the dictator of Uganda, he tried to send an airplane full of vegetables to Britain. They called it reverse reparations. He was apparently just heartbroken to see the old colonial power suffering so much.
An unbelievable full stop to that era. Okay, so let's pivot from political engineering to scientific engineering, and this is a much darker intersection. Scholarship and eugenics.
Yeah, we're shifting from controlling a state to this dangerous idea of measuring human worth. And the key phrase from the sources is a scholar and a racist. In the Victorian age, it was considered scholarly to be racist.
So the top minds of the day were using science to justify things like colonialism and exploitation.
Exactly. And the central figure here is Francis Galton, who is Charles Darwin's cousin. His legacy is so split. He invented the modern weather map and the actual dog whistle, but he was also the primary driver of eugenics.
And his work had a huge influence on American eugenics policies, which were so widespread that the sources say Hitler literally copy and pasted their laws when he was writing Nazi policy.
He did, especially policies on involuntary sterilization, which was most aggressively used in California.
And the way they tried to categorize human intelligence back then was so unsettling. They had these supposedly rigorous scientific terms for stupid people. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. It was a very precise hierarchy. At the top, you had the moron, who was a cleverist, capable of some basic thinking. Below that was the imbecile, who could, work with their hands, do manual labor. And at the very bottom was the idiot, defined as someone who couldn't keep themselves alive without help.
And these weren't insults. They were medical classifications.
They were scientific terms. And these labels, based on pseudoscience, had these horrifying real-world consequences, justifying the sterilization we just mentioned.
It just shows how the impulse to measure and categorize can lead to the impulse to control. And this brings us right to today. We might laugh at that stuff now, but we've walked right into a new ethical minefield.
Yeah.
The new eugenics of embryo selection.
And what's so fascinating is just the sheer amount of information we have. There are companies that can run a polygenic risk score. They can basically give parents a dashboard of, say, 10 fertilized eggs.
A dashboard.
Yeah, and you can choose an embryo based on statistical likelihoods.
Yeah.
For intelligence, for a strong immune system, or for the risk of developing autism or other conditions.
It feels like the ultimate endpoint of that engineering impulse we've been talking about this whole time. On one hand, selecting against a terrible disease, that seems understandable.
Correct.
But when you start selecting for desirable traits, you're not just accepting a child, you're consciously designing one.
And that tension it's the defining ethical issue of our time. We've gone from the honor-based cultural control in Japan to the political chaos in Britain through the dark history of scientific measurement, and we've landed here at the ability to literally engineer human life.
And to bring it all back to how history connects to our lives today, the sources mention the huge shift in just family dynamics. You look at someone like Churchill, his relationship with his father was all formal handshakes and emotional distance.
Right? The argument is that we were probably the first generation of fathers who were really trying, being present, emotionally invested, not just being some distant authority figure who buys you a drink when you turn 18. It's a vast difference in our own emotional engineering.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to take away. We've tracked this human impulse to control society, and now it's focused on our own genes through embryo selection. So if you, as a parent, have the power to edit out suffering and severe disorders, where do you draw the line? At what point are you no longer preventing pain, but just ruining the surprise of parenthood by setting these unhealthy expectations for a child that you literally bought and ordered? It's human autonomy versus parental design.